apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the campaign, because this is a time when I think a lot of the various candidacies and the various polls are starting to mean something. We, of course, have a Republican debate this Wednesday, and then after that, things are going to taper off. Okay, I admit that there will be a Republican debate on November 10th and a Democratic debate on November 14th. Those might be significant, but certainly after that, everybody can say that whatever happens between now and some of the primaries will be relatively insignificant. And the reason for that is that eventually people's attention will turn away from the candidacies to Christmas, Thanksgiving, and the rest. And especially since they have, I thought it's kind of interesting, a Republican debate scheduled for December 15th, a Democratic debate scheduled for December 19th. Does anybody seriously think that anybody is going to be paying attention? I'm not even sure that many people will pay attention to the Democratic debate coming up, simply because I think it's a foregone conclusion. And so what I am suggesting is what we know now probably will play out very significantly in the future. And what we know right now is Ben Carson has opened up a 14-point lead over Donald Trump in Iowa alone. That is very significant. Ben Carson has overtaken him. Now Ben Carson has basically has 32% support in Iowa, according to the latest Monmouth University survey. That's a 9-point gain for Ben Carson from the same poll held in late August, when Trump had fallen 5 points at that time. The poll also found that Ben Carson has the best favorability rating in the field, with an astounding 84% of Iowa Republicans having a positive view of him, compared to only 7% who view him negatively. I think it's fair to say that unless something really remarkable takes place in the debate on Wednesday, and of course we'll be talking about that Thursday after the debate to see if indeed that is the case, that he will probably sail into winning the Iowa caucus. Now, let's recognize that the Iowa caucus is not the entire primary, and the caucus delegates are oftentimes chosen. Sometimes they even change later on, and we've had a number of people over the years that have won an Iowa caucus that have not gone on to be the nominee. Mike Huckabee is a great example of that, but nevertheless, I think it illustrates that some things that many people thought might have been a flash in the pan. People have said, well, I think Donald Trump is a flash in the pan and he'll fade. Well, he may fade a little bit, but I suspect now that he will have those kinds of supporters all the way through to those primaries, which take place in February, and I'll give you that schedule in just a minute. And those individuals will probably most likely be willing to go out and work for his campaign. Likewise for Ben Carson. And then those that are a little further down, I think, are still in the running. That's Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, Senator Marco Rubio from Florida. But it also means that people that thought that Jeb Bush was the presumptive nominee, or that Carly Fiorina would catch these two front runners, or that Rand Paul would be able to do at least as well as his father, doesn't look like it's going to happen. And in just a minute, I do want to open up the phones to get some of your comments. A little bit later, we'll look at some other issues, and certainly one of those relates to the campaign today. And that is, the other day, Mitt Romney was speaking on the issue of Romneycare, of all things. The reason he was is that the founder of Staples, Thomas Stemberg, died just the other day. And so he was reflecting on his contribution, and Mitt Romney basically admitted that Obamacare would never have become law without Romneycare, and Romneycare would not have existed without the work of Thomas Stemberg. So he's really talking more about Thomas Stemberg, but in the process, he sort of also raised one of the questions that surfaced 4 years ago, and that is Mitt Romney the best individual to challenge President Barack Obama? Because indeed, he actually implemented something that many people felt was the precursor to Obamacare. And so how could he be an individual that would really challenge the ideas of the maybe signature piece of legislation by President Obama if indeed he was responsible for creating in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts the precursor to it? And so that question, along with, of course, Mitt Romney being a Mormon, that was an issue for some as well. So some people said, well, the Tea Party stayed home because he, after all, was not really challenging Obamacare, and that was one of the issues that they felt strongly about. Some of the Christians stayed home because they couldn't vote for a Mormon, whatever those issues, but in many cases, people began to wonder whether or not Mitt Romney would be a flawed candidate. I've had a chance to interview Mitt Romney, had him sit across the table from me, nice person, but was that the person that we needed as a candidate 4 years ago? I think you're going to have more and more people say no. So it, I think, brings us back to which candidate we would pick this time. And I say we in the sense of the Republican Party and those individuals that count themselves as pro-life, pro-family, religious liberty issues, because if indeed you assume that Hillary Clinton is indeed the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party on almost all those issues and many others we can mention, she would disagree rather dramatically with the issues we talk about every single day here on Point of View. But again, you got to recognize there's still a little bit of time between now and the first caucus. The first caucus in Iowa takes place February 1st. The first primary takes place in New Hampshire February 9th. There's a little bit of a pause there, and in some respects, you could win one or both of those and still not be the nominee. But if you lose both of those, it makes it more difficult, especially as then you run into a few more situations, because by February 20th, you have the Nevada caucuses, at least for the Democrats, and then just on the 23rd, the one for the Republicans, and during that Saturday, the 20th, you also have South Carolina. But after that, you really better be ready, and you better have money in the bank, and you better have ground troops, because you have Super Tuesday. And we've had Kelly Shackelford talk about this, but I thought I'd mention that just for a minute before we take a break. And that is, Super Tuesday is when you have 13 different states having either a primary or, in two cases, caucuses. So this happens on March 1st. So if you live in the states of Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, Massachusetts, Minnesota, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, and Virginia, you will choose your candidate on that day. And because these all happen at once, 13 different states, 11 primaries, 2 caucuses, and then it's followed up just a few days later on March 5th by a Kansas caucus, a Kentucky caucus, as well as a Nebraska caucus and a Louisiana primary. And then just days after that, we have Hawaii, Mississippi, Michigan. By that time, it pretty much is over. And those individuals that come into that with money and with people on the ground are going to be able to compete. And those that don't will drop out probably long before this. So when we see that Ben Carson, first of all, as we mentioned the other day when he was on the program, actually was able to raise more money in the third quarter than any other Republican candidate, and we see now that he has a 14-point lead over Donald Trump, does look a lot better for him in Iowa. And, of course, given the fact that he may now have some money, it would look better for how he might be able to do in New Hampshire and South Carolina, Nevada, and some others going into Super Tuesday. So let me take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the strategies some of the candidates are using. But this is one of those days when we've intentionally kind of left it as an open line. So I would love to hear from some of you, for example, that support either Donald Trump or Ben Carson. And if you'd like to explain why, we're going to give you a forum. But also I'm going to tell you a little bit more about some of the strategies some of the candidates are using to become the nominee. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when the framers drafted our Constitution, they wanted to make sure there were enough checks and balances to protect the citizens from any abuse of power. One of those checks was the constitutional power given to the House of Representatives to impeach anyone who abused their office. Sadly, this check on power is rarely used anymore. Now, George Will, in a recent column, makes a compelling case for the House of Representatives to impeach the current IRS director. Executive officers can be impeached for 3 reasons. The current IRS director is 3 for 3. He can be impeached for dereliction of duty because he failed to disclose the disappearance of IRS emails germane to the congressional investigation. He can be impeached for failure to comply because he and his agency have not complied with the investigation. And he can be impeached for breach of trust because of his refusal to testify accurately before Congress and due to his failure to keep his promises to Congress. Representative Jason Chaffetz is the chairman of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. He says the IRS has lied to Congress and destroyed documents under subpoena. He's accused the IRS chairman of lies, obfuscation, and deceit. On my radio program, I have interviewed many of the conservative groups who Lois Lerner and other IRS employees kept from obtaining their tax-exempt status. When Congress requested the emails of Lois Lerner, the IRS director complained that it would be a time-consuming effort. Meanwhile, Congress discovered that the backup tapes of the 24,000 Lerner emails were destroyed. There is more than enough evidence to warrant impeachment proceedings against the IRS director. The House should impeach, even if the Senate may not be willing to convict. At the very least, the impeachment proceedings will force the mainstream media to cover the IRS abuse. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Provident Films, Woodlawn, the true story of a spiritual awakening that saved a high school and shook a city. Woodlawn, in theaters now.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. One of the questions on the table is, who would you support if you had a chance to vote today, either in a caucus or a primary in the Republican Party? I think it's pretty obvious where most Democrats are going to vote, especially since you've had 2 drop out. Lincoln Chafee as well as Jim Webb have dropped out, so it is becoming even more obvious that indeed Bernie Sanders will probably win New Hampshire and pick up some various delegates along the way. But unless something remarkable happens or there's an indictment against Hillary Clinton, pretty obvious that she will be the nominee. So the real question, and it's always been more of a question, is what happens on the Republican side. I wanted to give you a chance to look at some of these issues. And Emily Swanson, writing for Newsmax, did a very good job of kind of summarizing 5 key points. And you might want to take some notes along this way in case you were involved in a conversation. I mean, just the other day I was at a party and about every other person was saying, well, who do you think's going to win? Who do you think has the best chance of winning? And all those kinds of things. And there's about 5 points that I wanted to give you real quickly. Point number 1, I've already sort of alluded to, and she says that the Republicans are high on Ben Carson. She says Carson is the candidate viewed most positively by Republican registered voters in the poll, about 65% giving him a favorable rating, just 13% saying they have an unfavorable rating of the retired neurosurgeon. To put that in perspective, let's go look at Donald Trump. Donald Trump has relatively high unfavorable ratings even within his own party. Those are at 36%. And so that is an issue because people tend to vote for somebody that they like, somebody that they believe in, somebody who they believe is trustworthy, somebody who shares their views, their vision, and those kinds of things. And certainly that is the case. As you work your way down, some other candidates are having trouble as well with a negative
opinions. Jeb Bush, for example, is trying to tamp that down. Again, say that 48% of Republican voters say that Jeb Bush is somebody they have a positive opinion about, but then 37% have a negative opinion of the former Florida governor. Those negative opinions do not go away, and when you have Donald Trump at 36% negative, Jeb Bush at 37% negative, you've got a problem. I mean, you can run lots of television ads, and for those of you that live in Iowa or New Hampshire, my heart goes out to you. I've just been hearing about the number of television commercials you have already seen, the number of ads you've already seen about some people like Jeb Bush. But it's not working, and it's just not helping in that regard. Aside from, of course, those individuals, you might have Marco Rubio, which has very high favorability ratings, Mark Huckabee, and some others. And interestingly enough, of all the candidates that will be on the stage Wednesday night, the one that is least liked, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. Interesting. So, first of all, point number one, the Republicans are very high on Ben Carson. Point number two, most want an outsider by an overwhelming percentage. 77% to 22% Republican registered voters say they prefer an outsider candidate who will change how things are done rather than someone with experience in Washington who can get things done. And so you are seeing that when you hear that in the top tier you have, of course, Carly Fiorina is risen into that as well, but you have Donald Trump and you have Ben Carson. But also, let's face it, even those who've been there for a while but have shaken things up a little bit, certainly Ted Cruz fits into that category, Marco Rubio. And you could argue that Jeb Bush is an outsider, but because of the Bush name, a lot of people don't think of him as an outsider. And so, of course, that is going to be another issue. So point number one, Republicans high on Ben Carson. Point number two, most want an outsider. Point number three, Republicans see Donald Trump as their best shot, which is kind of interesting. On the one hand, a lot of them are negative. A lot of them wonder whether or not he is the best candidate, but more of them tend to believe that he could win if he were nominated than any other Republican candidate. And I can see on my screen some people say, I like Ben Carson, but, okay, and we'll get to those as we take some of those phone calls in just a minute. Number four, Americans don't see a Republican victory. Among all people in the United States, less than half view any of the Republican candidates as people who could win a general election. Bush and Trump are both seen as possible winners, but only by 48% of Americans. That's more than, say, any other candidate. And so you can begin to see that one of the questions that sort of dogs Ben Carson or a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio or some others is, could they really win in the general election? Now, part of that has nothing to do with their candidacy, nothing to do with their character, nothing to do with their stand on issues, but everything to do with past history. I have a commentary coming out on this, but let me just make it very simple. If you're taking some notes, put down the number 18. The number is 18 states who in the last 6 elections, so you can put down 18 and 6, 18 states in the last 6 elections have always gone Democrat. So you've had 6 consecutive elections where 18 different states have gone Democratic, plus I might add the District of Columbia. And so you're talking about states like California, New York, and others, which have a lot of electoral votes. So you put down 18-6, put down one more number, 242 electoral votes. So 18 states have, in 6 consecutive elections, voted Democratic, and that actually adds up to 242 electoral votes. Now let's go back to Electoral College 101, and that is, in order to be elected president, you need 270 votes. Well, you can look at that and say, Hillary Clinton can pretty much come into this election assuming she has 242 electoral votes. All she needs to do is find 28 more. She wins Florida, she becomes president. She wins Ohio, Colorado, she becomes president. And so some of those, quote, swing states are going to be absolutely key. And so this is why it's more of an uphill climb for any Republican, no matter who he or she is, simply because of the way the Electoral College is skewed at the moment. And then finally, I've given you 1, 2, 3, 4, let's give you 5, not high on either party's candidate. Among those question, every Republican candidate except Ben Carson is viewed in a more negative than positive light. For example, just 31% of respondents have a favorable view of Donald Trump,
while 57% have an unfavorable view. More unfavorable view of Bush, as I mentioned, than others. And you go all the way down the list. And so, again, it is shown that, indeed, the American people aren't quite settled on who they are going to vote for. But the reality is, if they had to vote for individuals today, the two that would get the most number of votes, at least perhaps in Iowa, would be Ben Carson on the Republican side, Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. When you go to New Hampshire, maybe Ben Carson, maybe Donald Trump, probably Bernie Sanders. Then we go into some of the more contested primaries and Super Tuesday. So your thoughts. I'd love to get some thoughts about what you think we should do or who you might be voting for. So we'll start out in Georgia on the Good News Network. Brenda, thank you for calling today.
Good morning, Kerby. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I will vote for Dr. Ben Carson if he was if the primary was today. I would vote for him, and the reason is because he's just such a breath of fresh air. He's a Christian, and I'm a Christian too. I've been a Christian for many years, but he's very intelligent and he's very knowledgeable of the Constitution. That's what I like. What he doesn't know, he seems to read up on or talk to experts or, he mentioned he was talking to some economists. I think the last time he was on your show, to help give him some ideas about how to handle the economy. And he wants to get the country back to the way our founding fathers laid it out, for the people, by the people, of the people. And I just love it. It's finally somebody who's not trying to be politically correct. And I think he coined that term, PC police. He's always talking about the PC police. And now everyone's saying it. But, I like the fact that he's brave, he's bold, and he stands by his convictions, and he doesn't bend, to try to be politically correct. And we need someone like that. And I'm encouraged because even if there's, he doesn't have the political experience, but he knows where to get it, and he'll, have people come and help him. So I think it'll be a wonderful thing. I think that Donald Trump is really a decoy, and I kind of think he might fade out, maybe by Christmas or something.
Well, we'll see. So far, they both seem to have staying power. And you mentioned his understanding of the Constitution. Ben Carson, of course, wrote that book. We talked about it last Tuesday. More Perfect Union, What We the People Can Do to Reclaim Our Constitutional Liberties. I was very impressed with his understanding of the Constitution. And early, I have recommended that book to many of us that would like to understand more about the Constitution. Wish it was required reading for a few of the candidates, because if they actually read that and believed it, they wouldn't have said some of the things they've said on the debate stage, or some of the things I fear some of them will say on the debate stage this Wednesday. Certainly a lot of constitutional mistakes were made from the platform in the Democratic debate, but we even hear some of them in the Republican debates as well. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls. I'm going to give you an open line here. I'd love to know who you would support and, most importantly, why. Let's take a break, and we'll come back with more phone calls right after this.
If someone offers you an investment that is sure to double your money, what's the best way to respond? Yeah, run away. Run now, but hear me out. Next week is our fall push to sign up new members for Truth Team 360. What we need today is a leader willing to encourage others to give. Your gift will be used to match their gifts next week. You might give $360 and officially join the team, or make that big donation, $1,000, $500,000, or perhaps for you a donation of $50 is as much of a sacrifice as it is for that person who gives $1 million. Bottom line, this week we are gathering matching gifts so that next week we can encourage everyone else to match what you do. Come on, you're the one. Call now, 800-347-5151. Or online, pointofview.net/team. We've never done this before. Be the one who steps up and leads. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. One of the questions on the table at the moment is, which candidate do you think you would support right now if the election were held today, and why? Of course, we're looking at the fact that we have a Republican debate this Wednesday. We'll do some analysis of that on Thursday. And then, as I pointed out, yes, we do have some in November, one Republican, one Democratic on the 10th of November and the 14th. But the reality is that I think few people are going to be watching the Democratic debate, and I think interest is going to wane even in the Republican debate over time, especially as we get into the holiday season. Then we're going to turn around twice, and it's going to be time for the Iowa caucuses, the New Hampshire primary, and much, much more. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. And just a minute ago, as we were coming out to the break, you heard Bob talk about next week. That is our True 360 next week, in which we will be hearing from people like Gary Bauer and Tim Wildman and Penny Nance and Michael Ferris and Al Mohler and Louis Gohmert, to mention just a few. And that's often a time when we not only give you a chance to hear from them, but also encourage you to be one of our Truth Team members. And over the years, I've noticed some things that are interesting, and that is every once in a while we've had a major donor say, I'd like to give you a gift that could be matched to encourage other listeners to give. And if you listen to the program, sometimes we even had some of our guests spontaneously suggest that they would match any gift that came in that day. And we found that kind of as a great encouragement to listeners to donate. And I thought maybe we should do that, make that available to anybody. And so actually just a few minutes ago before today's program, I went to the Point of View webpage. You'll see a little banner there. It says, "Help us build a match." And I made a significant gift that we will hopefully match next week. And I wanted to encourage you to do the same. We've never really done this before, but you can find that banner that says, "Help us build a match." And if you'd like to give and be an encouragement to others by giving us a gift this week so that we can challenge others next week, that's something that we did want to make available to you. I've done it, and I certainly encourage you to do it as well. Let's take a phone call or two and pick up some of your comments on some of the candidates as we are now entering into what looks like a much more serious look at the candidates. And the fact, as I pointed out just a minute ago, Ben Carson has a very substantial lead. 32% support in Iowa has grown dramatically. So I think you could say that unless he really collapses in the next debate or two, or there's some kind of great scandal, neither of which I believe will happen, he's going to win Iowa handily. Now, the winners of the Iowa caucus don't always end up being the nominee, but sometimes they do. So we'll see how that plays itself out. So I'd love to hear from those of you there. But of course, number two is Donald Trump. I think he has a much better chance of winning the New Hampshire primary. And where would we be then as we go into, say, South Carolina, the Nevada caucus, if you have Ben Carson winning one and Donald Trump winning another one, and maybe Nevada gets won by, say, a Ted Cruz or something, then it's really going to be an interesting conversation as well as an interesting campaign. So let's give a few of you a chance to join the conversation. We'll go out to Arizona, KNLB. Joy, thank you for calling today.
Yes. Well, I heard on the news that Donald Trump said that he didn't know about the religion. And I was just wondering, since Ben Carson knows about it, could he sit Donald Trump down and tell him about Jesus?
Well, we certainly could do that. Yeah, it is interesting because Donald Trump, I think he calls himself a Presbyterian, but, it's sort of like a lot of people I run into. Oh, I go to church. When did you guys go to church? Christmas a year ago, 2 years ago. I was there once for a baptism. It's a little harder to tell. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'd be very glad if he would do that, because what's more important, winning for Jesus or being president?
Well, if nothing else, I got a real feeling that Mike Huckabee would do that. I've known Mike Huckabee for quite some time, and certainly has a great gift of conversation and evangelism, so maybe he could be one of those individuals as well. Joy, thank you for calling. That opens up a line. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia this time. Dwayne, what would you like to say?
Yes, I think that Ted Cruz would be a good choice for president. I like his 24-hour filibuster on the Senate floor, filibustering Obamacare. I like that. and that impressed me a lot about him. And I would support him for president. However, if Donald Trump or Ben Carson become the nominee, I would support them too. But I would hope that they would pick someone who has experience in their cabinet. And I hope that that person would be Ted Cruz or some other strong conservative.
Yes, and since you mentioned Ted Cruz, okay, let's talk about that for just a minute. A lot of people believe that not only is he strong on the constitutional issues, he's known for that, and certainly the issue of Obamacare and the filibuster was one, but I think people fail to realize how strong he is on foreign policy issues. And there's a great interview that was done just recently by Carolyn Glick with him in terms of looking at, first of all, if you want to talk about some really pro-Israel foreign policy wonks, Mike Huckabee fits into that category, very pro-Israel, Ted Cruz and others, but also just the understanding of these deals. I call them a treaty, but the Iranian nuclear deal. He's pointed out, for example, that under the Congressional Review Act, you cannot lift sanctions until Congress has actually reviewed the deal, and since no one ever submitted it to Congress, the president could be actually prosecuted or held in some kind of contempt, even by the Supreme Court, by a violation of that. And of course, on all sorts of other foreign policy issues, including whether we should arm the Kurds and whether or not we have the right strategy with Syria and ISIS. He has really been giving some very detailed statements about that. So if Ted Cruz does not become the next president or vice president, some people said, well, maybe he becomes the next Secretary of State. So we'll see how that plays itself out. And of course, I think Ted Cruz would love to be a Supreme Court justice. So we'll see how all that goes, but nothing else. We've put, Donald Trump on the table, Ben Carson on the table. Now we've put Ted Cruz on the table. So Dwayne, thanks for calling today. Let's see if we can get a couple more phone calls real quickly, and we'll go to Larry in Georgia, WAGP. What would you like to add?
Yes, I heard that you said something about there was 18 states that voted Democratic. Was that in the last two elections, I assume?
No, that is in the last 6 presidential elections. I'm sorry, I probably should have clarified that. We're talking about the Electoral College. So the point is that you have 18 states that in the last 6 presidential elections have voted Democratic. So whether you've elected a Barack Obama or a George W. Bush, or actually now you can go back to Bill Clinton, you can see that there is a kind of dangerous trend if you're a Republican or a very favorable trend if you're a Democrat.
I understand. I was just wondering now that, Mr. Ben Carson would stack up with the same type of people who voted for Barack Obama.
You've brought up a question that we have never talked about here, and I've been waiting for it to come up. So you win the award for coming up with one of the better questions today, because this is important. If you look at how did John McCain do, or how did Mitt Romney do in the African-American vote, they did not do well. Now, we all recognize that almost always the Democratic vote is dependent upon the black vote. African Americans always in presidential elections, and you have to go way, way back to find an exception to this, but in the recent history have always more than 90% of the time voted for the Democratic candidate, sometimes up to 95%. If Ben Carson were maybe just able to attract 5 or 10% of that. In other words, even if Ben Carson still would only get, say, like 85% of the if the Democrat would only get 85% of the African-American vote and Ben Carson would get just 15%, that really can hurt a Democratic candidate like Hillary Clinton, because there are certain constituencies you need in certain states to win those states. Then all of a sudden, you don't have Hillary Clinton trying to find an additional 28 electoral votes because she can assume she has 242. Now she, if you will, is trying to defend the 242 because some of those states, which up until now have always voted in the last 6 presidential elections Democratic, might actually turn into swing states and vote the other way. So this is why a person like Ben Carson is so attacked. And I read a while back, and we've posted on our website, something I would encourage people to read by Dennis Prager, Why the Left Really Hates Ben Carson. Part of it is, of course, just this belief that you can't be a conservative African American, But part of the other is that if indeed you believe that Hillary is your person and that's who you want to be elected, he poses a problem with one of the key constituencies in the Democratic Party. Now, that doesn't mean that all Democrats are black or all blacks are Democrats, but you can see the point. When a very high percentage of them usually do vote Democratic, if you had just begin to get anywhere from 5, 10, even maybe 15% of African Americans who traditionally have voted for a Democrat to now vote for Ben Carson, that changes almost everything we've talked about. Let's take a break. We'll come back and get into some more questions and conversation. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Larry asked a very good question, and I checked myself because I was doing some of that off the top of my head. According to exit polls, a little less than 4 years ago, if the exit polls are somewhat accurate, President Obama won 93% of the African-American vote. So you can say the other 7% either went to other or went to Mitt Romney. Like I said, he probably got about 5%. Well, if instead of getting 5% of the African-American vote, candidate Ben Carson, either as president or vice president, got 10% more, like 15%, that would change all sorts of various elections. It would change some of those states which are traditionally have voted Democratic. So instead of Republicans trying to figure out how to find the remaining votes and make sure that they didn't lose Virginia and Colorado and New Mexico and Florida and Ohio and some of those so-called swing states, they instead might make incursions into some others, that would be very different. So that is a very good question. And so, Larry, thank you for putting it on the table today. Let's pick up a few more phone calls, and even into the second hour, we'll still take your phone calls if we don't get through them this first hour. And we'll start in South Carolina this point. And Andrus, thank you for calling us. What would you like to add today?
Thank you. And this is my first time voting in America. I'm originally from Ghana, West Africa. But before I came here, I was adopted by a man who lives in Spokane, who is a Christian, and made me believe that America is a country where you are, your faith will be protected. I have a 3-month-old baby, so if I'm voting in an election, I want to vote for somebody who will protect my faith, protect my children, and give a better future for my daughter, Eliana. And I believe Dr. Ben Carlson has a great message. I listen to him. I've listened to almost everyone because I'm really excited about voting for the first time, and I think his message resonates with me. So I wish him luck, and I think he will be a great choice for a president.
And you become a naturalized citizen, I assume?
Yes.
Well,
and
again,
I do in Navy.
Yes, and you know what I've said is you probably know more about American history and the Constitution than the average American, because if you go through those citizenship classes, you're educated in a way that I wish we could educate more of our own native-born citizens who take for granted what you had to work hard to absolutely obtain. Let's get some more phone calls real quickly before we run out of time here. We will go to, is it Hosea in Georgia?
Well, I'm out of Texas, but I'm making deliveries in Georgia. I'm a truck driver.
Oh, very good. Well, I'm glad you're listening to us today in Georgia.
Albany, Georgia. And my concern was with Donald Trump. I don't know where he stands on Christianity. There was an interview where he was asked about God, and he said he never asked God for anything. That's my concern. Another concern is where he stands on same-sex marriage, where he stands on abortion, where he stands on Christianity. He was invited to, I believe, Preston Wood Baptist Church, and he didn't attend. He didn't like that. He didn't go.
Yeah, there were 6 that did go to Prestonwood Baptist Church. That was, by the way, for those of you who don't know, presidential forum. And you did have people like Carly Fiorina and Jeb Bush and Mike Huckabee and Ted Cruz and Ben Carson and Rick Santorum. Those were the 6. But you're right, he did not attend there. And in maybe the next hour, I would certainly love to hear from some of you that do support Donald Trump. I noticed one of our callers was going to. And we'll get to that, maybe some of those in the next hour if we don't now, because I'd love to hear some of your comments, because he still polls very well, but obviously because most of these broadcasts are heard on Christian radio stations, not exclusively, I suspect a lot of you are asking some of the questions that Christians would ask. And by the way, that's another real important issue for not only Donald Trump, but especially for Ted Cruz. And I will probably talk a little bit more about that in the second hour, because I think probably the best piece I've ever read on this, and I'm trying to dig it up, but I'll use it in the second hour, is by George Will, talking about how Ted Cruz is convinced that he really can win primarily through the Christian vote and getting a turnout. And for those of you that maybe heard our interview a couple of weeks ago where we had Gary Fraser in studio, and we had also George Barna by phone, they pointed out that if you look at the last presidential election in 2012, we had 39 million born-again Christians who did not vote. Either they were not registered to vote, or they were registered to vote but did not vote. Now, you might say, well, is that number accurate? Well, it's one, first of all, that a lot of people are using, and it's based upon the George Barna surveys over the years, where they ask individuals, have you had a born-again experience in the past that's still meaningful to you today? Do you believe that you are saved by grace? And the questions are pretty good. I recognize only God can separate a person's heart out, and that's understandable. But at the same time, I think you have a pretty good idea of the number of evangelical Christians, or at least born-again Christians out there. And the number that he uses is 90 million. But the sad reality is that when you start looking at those who actually voted, you come down to 39 million who did not vote. Now, that breaks down to 1/3, 2/3. 1/3, that is 13 million, were not registered to vote. And then 2/3, the other remaining ones, which would be 26 million, actually were registered to vote but did not vote. And we talked about on the program how there's an attempt to put together and have been putting together these databases to identify those individuals who are registered to vote, who are born-again Christians, who did not vote in the last election, and to cross-reference them and say, well, maybe they subscribe to Christianity Today or World Magazine, or they've given to Concerned Women for America, or they've given to the American Family Association or something like that, and then to actually get them to pledge that they would go out and vote. And Ted Cruz, and I would have to say Ben Carson, certainly are dependent upon increasing dramatically the Christian vote. And so that, I think, is going to be an issue as well. And so even though a lot of people seem to be sort of ignoring that really important issue, that's one that I think we're going to have to come back to talking about in the second hour. And so I'll talk a little bit about the strategy that Ted Cruz believes is necessary. And as I pointed out before, it wasn't by accident that he decided to launch his campaign in Liberty University and to really begin to court the Christian vote. And so I think in some respects we're going to see that to be the case. Marco Rubio, when he actually announced his campaign, had an individual that has been on this program with us before say the prayer for everyone. And so you've got these people emphasizing these ideas. And, of course, we just mentioned a minute ago, as you did at Prestonwood Baptist Church, when there was an opportunity to be on a forum that allowed you to give your Christian testimony. 6 said yes, and many of them decided to pass. So those are all going to be important issues in the campaign. Let me take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some more of your phone calls. If you'd like to join us today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Been trying to give you a little bit of an overview of these upcoming debates, the upcoming primary schedule, what some of the past electoral success or failures have been, and to learn a little bit more about that. But also, of course, we've talked about today the rather remarkable announcement that Ben Carson now has a 14-point lead over Donald Trump in Iowa. When you have 32% support and you have the highest favorability rating, don't think anything's going to change between now and that Iowa caucus on February 1st. Let's take a break. But just before we do so, as I mentioned just about a half an hour ago, we are doing our Truth 360 program next week. We're going to have Gary Bauer and Tim Wildman and Penny Nance and Michael Ferris, Al Mohler, Louis Gohmert, to mention just a few. And in the past, sometimes we'll have individuals say, well, I'd like to have a gift, and then it will be a match, so that's an encouragement for other individuals to join with us. And so we are encouraging you to do that. And as I mentioned just before the start of the program today, I went on our own Point of View website. I went to the banner that says, Help Us Build a Match, and indeed put down a substantial gift that can be used next week. And I would encourage you to do the same. I'm not asking you to do anything that I don't do. So again, visit the website, pointofview.net. Click on that button that says Help Us Build a Match. You can help us for our Truth 360 program next week. Let's take a break, though. We've got lots of phone calls, and we will take all those calls. If you'll hang on, we'll get those right after these important messages.
If someone offers you an investment that is sure to double your money, what's the best way to respond? Yeah, run away. Run now, but hear me out. Next week is our fall push to sign up new members for Truth Team 360. What we need today is a leader willing to encourage others to give. Your gift will be used to match their gifts next week. You might give $360 and officially join the team, or make that big donation, $1,000, $500,000, or perhaps for you a donation of $50 is as much of a sacrifice gives $1 million. Bottom line, this week we are gathering matching gifts so that next week we can encourage everyone else to match what you do. Come on, you're the one. Call now, 800-347-5151. Or online, pointofview.net/team. We've never done this before. Be the one who steps up and leads. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you're just joining us, we've been talking about the presidential campaign, in part because we have a Republican debate this Wednesday, and I do believe that it will be the last sort of significant debate for some time. I admit that there is a Republican debate November 10th. There's a Democratic debate November 14th. Don't believe a lot of people are going to watch those, because I think things are going to start fading. And by the time you get to the ones December 15th and December 19th, really, how many people are going to be watching those? And so that's why I think that what we are seeing now is real. And when you see that indeed Ben Carson has a 32% support of Republicans in Iowa, I think you could say with some certainty, I mean, nothing's ever certain, but with some at least predictable accuracy, that indeed he probably could win the Iowa caucus. It's possible he could win New Hampshire, but if not, I think maybe Donald Trump wins New Hampshire, and then we see what happens after that. But again, this debate that is Wednesday will take place in Colorado, which will be one of those swing states. The title is Your Money, Your Vote. So it's going to get into some of the economic issues, and that may actually be in favor of a few that really have talked about economic issues, like Donald Trump and Carly Fiorina, and some others, of course. It'll be in the Coors Events Center. You will have the same kind of division that you've had before, in that you have two debates. And so you're going to have a situation in which you're going to have four individuals that will be in the lower tier, if you will. And those will be Rick Santorum, Bobby Jindal, George Pataki, and Lindsey Graham. And then, of course, you'll have on the front tier, you will have Donald Trump, Ben Carson, Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Mike Huckabee, Rand Paul, Carly Fiorina, Chris Christie, and John Kasich. So we'll see how that plays itself out. A little bit later this hour, I want to talk about Ted Cruz's plan to win the GOP nominations. A very good piece done by George Will. If we have time, I've also posted some articles on some reactions to the testimony by Hillary Clinton last Thursday on Benghazi and a number of others. And, of course, we have some great material for you to read. So, again, you'll find some material on Republicans actually favoring outsiders. I read from a little of that, and that's posted on our website. Ted Cruz and his plan to win, that comes from George Will. And then my commentary on Christian voters, in case you wanted to go back and get some of those numbers on the fact that we have 39 million born-again Christians who did not vote in the last presidential election. And that breaks down to 1/3, 2/3. 1/3 that were not registered to vote, 2/3, 26 million that were registered to vote but did not vote. And, of course, for the Ben Carsons of the world, the Ted Cruzes, and really even for the Republicans in general, if they're going to win the general election, they're going to have to get a better turnout among the Christian vote, as well as many other votes as well. So let's take some phone calls, and I'll get into a couple of other issues. So let's head out to Georgia first on the Good News Network. Tommy, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yes, I thought that Carson and Trump would be a great ticket, because you got a humble man at the beginning, and he would kind of keep Trump in the line, because Trump, I'm scared of him, especially with foreign ministers and foreign relationships. He can put us in war, because he has no I don't know what you call it. He just wants to go. But you know what? Trump, Carson's a man that if he doesn't know what to do, he knows who to go to, and he's kind of a man that, America needs now, that because America's in a mess, and he needs a bunch of good people telling him what to do. And I think Carson would be that man that would ask, because he doesn't know it all. He don't mind telling you,
But you know what? They can't say he's not a smart man, can they?
You know,
That's what I'm
they
thinking.
did ask Donald Trump the other day if they would think about a Trump Carson. It'd be hard for me to imagine Donald Trump taking the number 2 spot. But back to your point just a minute ago, and I think I'll put you on hold since we're having a little bit of a feedback problem there. But Pat Buchanan wrote a very good piece about Donald Trump, and his argument is that Donald Trump probably would not commit us to a war as easily as some of the other candidates, like a Lindsey Graham or even what we ended up under George W. Bush, because as you may know, Pat Buchanan is not real big about intervention in the world, and so be real careful before we would commit ground troops to any kind of military action. So, be interesting to see, but would Ben Carson, if he won, pick Donald Trump, and more importantly, would Donald Trump be willing to be the VP if Ben Carson were the president? And frankly, there's been a little bit of statements back and forth, actually one direction. Ben Carson is so good about not responding. Donald Trump made some rather critical comments of Ben Carson the other day, and Ben Carson said, well, he can believe whatever he wants to believe, and just focuses on trying to keep the attention on the issues and bringing healing to America. So, a good point. And Tommy, thank you for adding that conversation to our discussion. Let's, if we can, maybe stay in Georgia, but we'll go to WLPG. And Ken, what would you like to add to us?
Thanks for taking my call, Curry, and thanks for the program today. I just wanted to lead off with the fact that this morning early, and I'll get back on subject, Kelly Shackelford was on Fox and Friends with Lieutenant Commander Wes Motter, and a higher court has overturned the lower court rulings against Lieutenant Commander Wes Motter. And praise God for the work of the Liberty Institute. I listen to you guys quite often, and I know Kelly is on your program, and they're doing a wonderful work for defending religious freedom.
Yeah, and I saw that on Facebook. Kelly alerted me that he was going to be on this morning, and probably should have turned on the TV. Said, I'm not one of those people that's such a news junkie that I turn the TV on in the morning. I never turn it on in the morning. But I was tempted to because I knew that, and I saw some posts since then. But again, for people that are not familiar, Chaplain Motter was being censured for giving his opinion, his biblical opinion about homosexuality. He was set up, and so then he was really going to go through a long, difficult process, we felt. And then Kelly on a Friday said, I can't announce it yet, but maybe we can announce it on Monday. And of course, a few hours later he had to, because it had already been out there that indeed they overturned everything. And so Chaplain Wes Motter was not only vindicated, but he was then allowed to choose his next venue for ministry and for his work in the military, and chose that near his kids. And so it's a great story, and I'm glad that they covered it on Fox News.
Yes, it was great. But back to Mr. Trump, Mr. Carson, I think Mr. Carson is a very honorable man. We need a God-fearing president to right the ship. I know it takes a long time and to turn a ship that has gone astray as big as this ship, the United States of America. But if it came down to pulling the lever between Trump and Carson, I'd have to pull for Carson. And I knew about Ben Carson years ago. He appeared on the Pat Robertson show when he was still practicing surgery. And a couple from Atlanta had a young son that had a tumor. And if I remember correctly, Ben Carson said it was almost going to be not able to be approached surgically. He said it was like one night he was pondering it, and he was thinking about it. It's like God just gave him a vision of how to approach this tumor three-dimensionally in this child's brain. And this young boy was a picture of perfect health. And I praised God. I said, if anybody was going to work on my brain, I'd want Dr. Ben Carson. Of course, my wife probably thinks it needs to be worked on. But anyway, that's beside the point. But I like Ted Cruz. I think that we have a number of Republican candidates that are founded, I believe, in godly principles. I'm disappointed that Mike Huckabee's not doing better.
Sure. Let me take a break. I've got one of those mandatory breaks. Ken, thank you for adding that conversation. We'll have more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, every 4 years, presidential candidates talk about giving away lots of free stuff in order to get elected. Tim Wildman, in a recent column, explains the promise and peril of free stuff. He believes that Republicans will have to deal with a major challenge. Democratic candidates are offering lots of free stuff, and it's hard to out-free stuff the Democrats. Leading the way in giving out free stuff is Senator Bernie Sanders. One article in the Wall Street Journal estimated that the cost of all his proposals, so far, would be on the order of $18 trillion. The largest amount of that would be for the conversion and full funding of a single-payer Medicare-type health care plan. Other big-ticket items would be his desire to increase Social Security benefits and provide free college tuition and better student loan financing. The latter would cost at least $750 billion each year, and I might mention that he not only wants to provide free college education for all Americans, but even for students who are in this country illegally. Now, you might wonder how he thinks we are going to be able to pay for all this. Well, his answer is simple: tax the rich. But that won't work. A few years ago, I did a commentary on how much revenue you could raise if you confiscated all the money earned by billionaires and millionaires. Now, the numbers might be a little different now, but I'm sure that they are at least the right order of magnitude. For example, if you confiscated every dime from people with annual incomes of $10 million or more, you would only have a total of about $240 billion. Of course, you couldn't get away with confiscating the annual incomes of Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, and others. This election season, we'll be hearing about government giving away free stuff. But you know, we desperately need to inject some common sense into these campaign pledges. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
All right, once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kevin Lehman with us tomorrow, and we'll get back into some of the books that I think you need to read, but also we'll spend some time this week looking at the campaign as we're doing right now. 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to tell me who you support, and I haven't yet had anybody that's Trump supporter. I'd love to hear from one or two of you as well. And then, of course, we have the debate, which is taking place, as I mentioned, on Wednesday in Colorado. You'll have a chance to hear from all the candidates that have not dropped out so far. I suspect the bottom four probably will drop out fairly quickly, but we'll see how that unfolds, and that will be the last, I think, significant debate. There is one in November, and even one in December for Republicans, and one in each of those months for the Democrats. But I think some of the interest will wane, and some of this is being locked in as a real likelihood that indeed Ben Carson could indeed win the Iowa caucus. As I've pointed out before, there have been a number of people that have won the Iowa caucus that did not win the nomination, but it's a good first step, and we'll see how that plays out. Let's take some more phone calls. We'll head out to Kentucky this time. Woody, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the program. I've been listening on the phone.
Yes, well, I'd love to get your comments if I can.
Yeah, comment is that earlier in your previous hour, someone had mentioned about the fact that...
Having a little trouble hearing you. Can you talk a little louder or closer
okay.
to... Yeah.
The previous caller had mentioned regarding Donald Trump not showing up to the Baptist Forum.
Sure.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No, that's his choice. Not everybody could be there for all sorts of reasons, business and schedules and all that. I mean, so I wouldn't read too much into it, but I thought it was interesting that all 6 of those candidates that were on that platform gave their testimony, including, for the first time, I'd really not heard much of the testimony of Carly Fiorina, which was pretty powerful, and that was a surprise to me. Go ahead.
Yeah. Also, Carson really is not a biblical-based religion that he's into, and for that reason, he has salvation by works, not born-again Christian. And I could see that almost Carson's, all of his statements, as well as Trump's, they're pretty equal. In other words, in terms of the individual and their character and everything, it's just that Trump is more of a secular businessman. Now, I support Trump from that perspective with Carson, but for a constitutional person, it's Rand Paul. He's outstanding compared to every other candidate.
I am surprised he has not gotten more traction. I mean, first of all, he has the legacy of his father, and we've had Ron Paul on this program quite often, actually, and occasionally Rand Paul. Hard to get candidates on generally anyway, your audiences, and I think our audiences sometimes are much bigger than even it was kind of a stepchild, and so they'll go to 1 or 2 that also have a is that I'm always surprised that Rand Paul hasn't been able to attract more supporters, but he's really getting into the single digits, and if things don't
he's an outstanding candidate, but he still has some tendency to lean liberal.
most of this when he was at Southwestern Baptist Seminary. We've had good relationships, but even I guess it'd be 8 years ago when he was running, there would be a time when I said, I really like him. Then he'd say something, I go, boop, where'd that come from? That Mike Huckabee's days are long either. I think you're you can't get traction and you're still in single digits. Sooner or later, you have to say to yourself,
having me. About Dean Carson, there's a couple of, actually 3 things that are very concerning to me. Statement that him and Al Sharpton have the same goals, and his top advisor, I believe it's his top one, or one of the top ones, has links to Farrakhan, whatever his name is. And then he didn't like Medicare, he was going to do away with that, and then when he was asked about it, he was not going to.
Okay, now, first of all, let me take them in order. Quality in society, but we would get there in different ways. So I'd have to go back and look at that to see if that was anything more than just saying, we all have the same goal or whatever. So it could be that's all he said. It's never been connected to Louis Farrakhan, so that's a new one. And have Medicare and Medicaid in process. This has been a just immediately move away from them. But the goal, I think, that he has is to put more power, more economic power in the hands of individuals. Be surprised if he's even talked about this idea of there being a pair. Ben Carson, Donald Trump said this about you, and what do you say about that? Or, you've got I hope that we get to the point where you have some of the hosts, and again, I don't know these individuals that well that are part of the CNBC debate. And those kinds of questions need to be addressed in the debates, and so Wednesday night. If not, then I guarantee you there will be fewer people watching future debates if it's all about, Donald Trump, you said this about Carly Fiorina, and Carly Fiorina, you get into a couple of other issues. I do want to set forth to you, especially the importance of the Christian vote. A base plus strategy. We have posted the article by George Will on our website just to illustrate that, and I thought I'd get into it for a few minutes to again remind us of how important that Christian vote is. As I've mentioned more than once, but let me mention it at least one more time. Hopefully it will sink in. In the last presidential election, we had 39 million born-again Christians of voting age who did not vote. And so, again, 13 million of those were not registered to vote. And so one of the first things we need to do is make sure that our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, our family members are registered to vote. And then you had 26 million who are registered to vote, but they did not vote. And so, again, we need to encourage those individuals that especially agree with the principles we talk about here on Point of View to make it to the ballot box and cast an intelligent vote. We'll come back and we'll still take some more of your phone calls and then move on to some other topics. If you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
If someone offers you an investment that is sure to double your money, what's the best way to respond? Yeah, run away. Run now, but hear me out. Next week is our fall push to sign up new members for Truth Team 360. What we need today is a leader willing to encourage others to give. Your gift will be used to match their gifts next week. You might give $360 and officially join the team, or make that big donation, $1,000, $500,000, or perhaps for you a donation of $50 is as much of a sacrifice as it is for that person who gives $1 million. Bottom line, this week we are gathering matching gifts so that next week we can encourage everyone else to match what you do. Come on, you're the one. Call now, 800-347-5151. Or online, pointofview.net/team. We've never done this before. Be the one who steps up and leads. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kind of doing a Candidates Day just to look at some of the issues and also some of the strategy, which we'll talk about in just a minute, that some of the candidates are using to first get the nomination and then win the general election. And let's go back to the phones. We'll head out to Illinois this time. WPEO. Evelyn, thank you for calling today.
Hi, I was calling because I'm so disappointed that the debate for the Republican candidates is on a Wednesday again. Like, are they doing that on purpose? Like, most people, we don't have a DVR, so we have no way to record it, and so then we're at the mercy of whoever, you know. I don't want to hear what the pundits say. I want to be able to see it for myself. But, I mean, if you attend church or help with any church function, it's on a Wednesday night, and I just don't understand why. Like, are they purposely doing that?
No. First of all, let's give them some credit. The next one, November 10th, is on a Tuesday, so it won't be. But I'm with you. I mean, the first one I did stay home and watch, but I oftentimes am speaking at a church Wednesday night, or over the last couple of weeks, we've had the Institute for Creation Research at our church, and we're going there every Wednesday night. And it's, okay, I really need to watch this because, after all, this is something I'm talking about, but I also need to be in church. But the sad reality is, Evelyn, a lot of the leaders in the Republican Party, if you were to come up to them and say, why are you doing this on Wednesday? Because that conflicts with church, they'd go, what? Church?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you go to church on Sunday. No, nobody goes to church on Wednesday. And you go, you don't live in my world. You don't live in your world.
I know.
I mean, they are so disconnected, some of the leaders in the Republican Party. And that's also true in the Democratic Party. So I'm not criticizing one party or the other. Oftentimes these leaders are so disconnected. They don't go to church or synagogue. They don't know people that go to church or synagogue.
I even tried to go on YouTube and see the forum that they had in Texas to see if I could look at that on YouTube where they interviewed.
It is now up. I can put that link up if you'd like to see it, because we do there is that link, and we could put that link up there.
I would like to see that anyway, because it makes a big difference, and I really am rooting for Ben Carson. I know that people say, well, he hasn't been a governor, but I tell you what, he has the wisdom of the Lord, and to me, I mean, I just think of David and Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
He has the wisdom of the Lord, and I believe that he's smart enough to know if he doesn't know it, he's going to make sure that he gets the right people to help him make the right decision.
So again, let me encourage you that if you go to a couple of places, like you type in Prestonwood Presidential Forum video, you can find a link, but we'll try to see if we can stick it up there because it is now available. And of course, you can find that. So you could at least hear from 6 of the candidates, which is pretty good.
I didn't even know that it took place until I was listening. Might have been even your show last Monday, somebody's last Monday afternoon, and I heard them, and I didn't even know anything about it until then. Yeah. And then I was trying the other day to see if I could get it off of YouTube anyway. But Ben Carson is probably my favorite. I mean, I just don't want Donald Trump, but I mean, I don't know.
Well, you keep listening to this program, because last time, I didn't do it after the first debate, but I did do it after the second debate. You might remember, we played, I think, Andrew, didn't we play about a dozen or so clips? So you got a chance to hear from just about everybody that participated in the debate. And so we'll try to do that again. We did it for the Democratic debate. We'll do it for the Republican. We'll pull down some of those and play them on Thursday, and you can have a chance to hear. And like you, I won't be able to watch it or listen to it live. I have other commitments that night. And so we'll be able to dig up those because, again, the good news is a lot of those clips are available. So we'll try to give you some of the highlights on Thursday, give you a chance to hear those. We did that for the Democratic debate last time. We'll do it for the Republican debate this time. And that way, if you miss it, at least you'll get a chance to hear. And if you want, even watch online some of the various most insignificant things that were said. And a lot of this is going to be on economics, and I'd love to hear how some of the candidates are going to address some of those very important issues. So thank you so very much for raising that question. And let's head out to Oklahoma now. Scott, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, first of all, I'll admit up front, I'm a Ted Cruz person, and I'm so frustrated. He's so good. He's sold out to Christ, and he's very articulate, and yet he's not really doing good in the polls. I'm still going to vote for him in the primaries, though. But my issue is this on the debate. I would advise Ted Cruz, if he's got any of his listeners listening, or anybody, Farina, Carson, whoever it is, that when the announcer said, well, this guy said this against you, I would tell them and say, don't respond to that.
Yeah.
And tell the reason you're not responding to that, somebody said this about you, you want to stick with the issue, not with what somebody said.
Yeah, and I would hope that because this one is supposed to be on economics, that we don't get into that silliness about are you pledging to run as an independent or a Republican? That was a question I think Brett Baer thought he should raise the first one, but then it started, and you say this and you say that. Don't worry about that. I mean, I just want to know what kind of policies you're going to actually try to bring about. And frankly, back to your comment about Ted Cruz, that plays in his strength. I mean, this is an individual that has mastered the technical details of everything from the budget to the constitutional process. And certainly there are a fair number of candidates that sort of wave their hands and don't really give you specifics, and he would. So I think he would come out a lot better if indeed that's what they do. With that as background, just before we take a break, let me just quote briefly from the George Will column. I encourage you to read it in its entirety because it says George Will says that Ted Cruz actually has what he calls a base plus strategy. And that is that indeed he's going to not focus as much time and attention on the so-called independent or swing voters, but really try to build the base. And so it's kind of intriguing because his chief strategist, Jason Johnson, says, I'm working backward from Election Day, and that is because Cruz's plan for winning the necessary 1,200 conventional delegates is an extrapolation from his strategy for winning 270 electoral votes. And that is that what he wants to do is, if you can, change the composition of the electorate. This comes with the realization that you've had a number of individuals that are not showing up at the polls. Between George W. Bush's 2000 election and his 2004 re-election, the turnout of non-Hispanic whites increased by astonishing 10 million. But Barack Obama produced a surge of what Johnson calls two election voters. In 2008, the African-American voting rate increased from 2004, while white voting declined slightly. And in 2012, African-American voters in higher rates than whites, which again leads to, is there a possibility of a Ted Cruz, Ben Carson ticket? Because, again, back to some of the things that we talked about earlier when Larry called in about whether or not Ben Carson might attract more blacks as well. He points out that the non-voting college experience are among Cruz's principal targets. His general compatibility and lack of attacking on Donald Cruz reflects Cruz's campaign's attempt and estimate that perhaps 1/3 of those who are actually interested in Donald Trump right now have not voted in recent elections, and if anything might eventually go to Ted Cruz. As a matter of fact, that's what George Will says. If Trump is doing downfield blocking for Cruz, beginning the expansion of the 2016 electorate by energizing people whose alienation from politics has made them non-voters. Let's recognize, as we pointed out just a minute ago, we used the Christian voter list and pointed out that of that 39 million, you had, first of all, 12 million, or 13 million basically, that were not registered to vote, 26 million that were registered to vote and did not vote. If you move out of the Christian vote into those who might occasionally attend church or maybe are somewhat secular, there are certainly a large number of those individuals also who have not voted. And if indeed, because of Donald Trump and because of Ben Carson and because of Ted Cruz, and you look at those three, they might actually encourage more and more people to vote than have voted before by changing the composition of the electorate. You give an opportunity for one of those Republican candidates, or possibly two of those three if they run on a ticket together, to actually win. And that goes back to some of the things we talked about just a few minutes ago. 18 different states in the last 6 presidential elections always voted Democratic. If some of those begin to turn because you get more people out who would vote for a Donald Trump, a Ben Carson, or a Ted Cruz, you change everything. And again, right now, if indeed nothing changes, then Hillary Clinton, the presumptive nominee, starts with 242 electoral votes. You only need 270. All she has to do is find one more state. Florida, Colorado, Pennsylvania, somebody like that, and it's all over. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And for a few more minutes, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I'd like to reflect back on just a minute the 2012 election, because we've learned a few things even in the last few days here that reflect on that, and I think once again underscore the need to have a candidate that really can stand the test of what they're going to have to address and how they're going to have to deal with various media issues and how they're going to have to begin to take the case to the American people. And one of those I mentioned in passing earlier, but let me mention it again, and that is Mitt Romney was reflecting upon the death of the founder of Staples, Thomas Stemberg, who actually had been helping at that time Governor Mitt Romney in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And he said, without Tom Stemberg pushing it, I don't think we would have had Romneycare. And without Romneycare, I don't think we would have had Obamacare. So without Tom, a lot of people wouldn't have health insurance. He may have been referring back to health insurance just in Massachusetts, but I think he was referring to it in general. And this, I think, just illustrates the fact that even Mitt Romney recognized in some ways he was a flawed candidate. He could never really take the fight on Obamacare to President Obama because it was his plan in Massachusetts that was the precursor. It was the foundation for Obamacare. And so from the very beginning, we had difficulty because Mitt Romney could not really attack Obamacare without having to attack himself and attack the plan that he instituted in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And I remember even asking him about that, and he tried to make a distinction between the two, but it was trying to make a distinction where there really wasn't a difference. And so that was one of the issues. The other one, of course, is the unwillingness of Mitt Romney to really camp on this issue of Benghazi. And here it is now 4 years later. Well, actually, I guess we'd say 7 years later. Let's be honest about that, since some of that has taken place, and we're still dealing. Let me get it back. 3 years later, I'm jumping all over the place here. 3 years later, where we're still dealing with some of these issues. And one of the articles I posted by Andrew McCarthy is, I think, really helpful because he begins by quoting from Hillary Clinton, who said, "We've seen the heavy assault on our post in Benghazi that took the lives of those brave men. We've seen rage and violence directed at American embassies over an awful internet video that we had nothing to do with." You might remember those words coming out in September of 2012. Okay, well, he goes on to say that those words, and he calls them depraved words, were spoken by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton with President Obama at her side on September 2012. And this was at the Joint Base Andrews during the most sacred of rites, the return of the remains of Sean Smith, Glenn Doherty, Tyrone Woods, and, of course, Ambassador Chris Stevens, all slain in the line of duty in Benghazi. All slain, it must never be forgotten, says Andrew McCarthy, by jihadists carrying out what Clinton, Obama, and high-ranking national security officials throughout the U.S. government knew full well was a planned terrorist attack, not a protest run amok or incited by an awful internet video. A little bit later in the article, which you can read in its entirety, they say that besides all that, we now know that while the siege ensued, Clinton emailed daughter Chelsea to explain that Americans had been killed in Benghazi by an al-Qaeda-like group. That came out in the hearings on Thursday. This was about an hour before Clinton and Obama consulted by phone, and immediately after which the State Department published this blame the video announcement. And he goes on to say, yes, Clinton and Obama knew that it was a terrorist attack, but tried to con the country into believing it was a spontaneous response to a video. And he goes on to say that a State Department memo documents that on the very day after her duplicitous public statement, Clinton informed Egypt's prime minister, "We know that the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest." And, of course, you had individuals going on talk shows and making all sorts of comments and claims and all of the rest. And so this has been one of the difficulties of even getting to the source of what actually happened in Benghazi. And more recently, Congressman Louis Gohmert, who will be with us next week and has been on this program many times before, points out that part of the reason we can't get to some of this information is it seems like some of the witnesses in Benghazi have been threatened. Here is one of the articles that I think illustrates it best. There were dozens of Americans that were in Benghazi on that fateful night in September 2012 when 4 Americans were murdered in a terrorist attack. Very few have come forward to share their version of the events, though. You would think that all these people would want to tell their story, particularly in light of so many unanswered questions about that night. But President Obama has used an orchestrated strategy to censor Benghazi survivors and their families, with many of them gagged by non-disclosure agreements or silenced by threats. Sadly, more than a dozen of these brave souls have died over the past 2 years without a chance to share their story. So the other day, Congressman Louis Gohmert from the state of Texas was on Fox News, and he spoke about this on America's Newsroom, relaying the story of a committee hearing on Benghazi in which an intelligence official said that nobody who was injured in the Benghazi attack was hospitalized at Walter Reed Medical Center. Gohmert knew this was a lie, though, because he had personally met a Benghazi survivor at the D.C. area hospital. And the congressman says he believes that a particular intel officer was fed false information, and also thinks that other intel officers were being forced to keep quiet about what they know. So if nothing else, I think we certainly can illustrate that we had a lot of issues 3 years ago when we talked about a candidate, Mitt Romney, and we also know that there was certainly an opportunity to begin to question whether or not the various statements being made about terrorism in general and about Libya in particular were actually true. Let's go back to the phones and give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation. We'll go to North Carolina, WLPG. Andrea, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Thank you, Kerby. I was just hearing what you just said, and you just said a mouthful. You were talking about Mitt Romney, Staples, Benghazi, all that at one time. I just want to say it doesn't look like there's been a lot of transparency, which is what you're alluding to, with any of it, with the funding of Obamacare, which started actually 2008, and then he pushed it forward at Christmas 2012. But it just, the transparency is not there, and I don't know, I don't get it, but I just think I guess I wanted you to talk about that. I don't think that anything is transparent. That word is a political word that you guys use on the radio, that people use on television and all that. It was supposed to mean openness and honesty, but I don't see it. But here we are, 2015, and where are we today?
Yes. Well, and back to, again, the Benghazi ones. We just had the last real hearing of Benghazi. There'll be some others, and there'll be some mop-up and all the rest, but this didn't really generate a great deal. I've been a little bit disturbed that even when we have had these hearings, whether it was with Cecile Richards on Planned Parenthood or whether it was this one with Hillary Clinton, sometimes the questions or the follow-up aren't there. And, of course, you have the mainstream media that's going to protect some of those individuals. But, again, back to your key issue, transparency. Do we really have an open conversation? Do we really know what the Secretary of State did? Do we really know that we have all of the emails from Benghazi? And the answer is probably not. She said that, I didn't conduct foreign policy by email. And that shouldn't have even passed the straight face test. There should have been laughter in the room when she said that. But everybody goes, oh, okay, well, that's why we don't have any emails. And basically a way of saying you can be looking for the emails that have a smoking gun, but they don't exist. And if they did, she got rid of them. And so here's the lack of transparency we have. And all the way through, as you point out, even the way in which Obamacare was passed, in which they, as we've pointed out before, took another bill, stripped it out, put the Obamacare in there to use that so that they could pass it because they wouldn't have been able to pass it in any other way. So this is why I think it's important to pay attention to who the candidates are, what their strengths and weaknesses are. And, of course, we're going to have a Republican debate on Wednesday. We'll talk more about that on Thursday. If you'd like to join the conversation tomorrow, I hope that you'll do so. And if you'd like to read a little bit more about what we've posted, it's on the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
If someone offers you an investment that is sure to double your money, what's the best way to respond? Yeah, run away. Run now, but hear me out. Next week is our fall push to sign up new members for Truth Team 360. What we need today is a leader willing to encourage others to give. Your gift will be used to match their gifts next week. You might give $360 and officially join the team, or make that big donation, $1,000, $500,000, or perhaps for you a donation of $50 is as much of a sacrifice as it is for that person who gives $1 million. Bottom line, this week we are gathering matching gifts so that next week we can encourage everyone else to match what you do. Come on, you're the one. Call now, 800-347-5151. or online pointofview.net/team. We've never done this before. Be the one who steps up and leads. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.